Yeah.
Or throw it at somebody else. Tim thinks you need to practice, so.
Tim's going to do it for you, I'm sure.
Keep him warm. He wanted me to bring you my 20-pound sledge.
All right, we'll start. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 3 p.m., May 22nd, 2017. I'm Dr. David Bagley, the hearing officer for docket 17-4802 in regards to Brook Mine, LLC. Present today from the Wyoming Environmental Quality Council are Tim Flitner, Megan Lawley, Megan Diggenfelder, Nick Agopian, and Deb Balmer. Councilman Fairservice has recused himself due to a conflict. Parties present today are Isaac Sutphin and Jeff Pope on behalf of Brook Mine LLC, Andrew Coleman and James LaRock on behalf of DEQ.
Councilmember Bagley, I apologize for interrupting. We also have Tom Sansonetti here on behalf of Brook Mine.
Great, thank you. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council, and Jake Gilberts on behalf of Mary Brezick Fisher and David Fisher. Also present for the council are Jim Ruby, Executive Officer, and Joe Gerardin, Council Business Coordinator, and Ryan Shellhouse from the Attorney General's Office.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You forgot Lynn.
And
I did not,
my apologies.
Lynn Moongarden and Clay Gregerson on behalf of Bighorn Coal Company.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This hearing is being held at Sheridan College, room TRCC 008 in the Thorn Rider Campus Center, 3059 Coffeen Avenue, Sheridan, Wyoming. There is a court reporter present. So this afternoon, what I'd like to do is have opening statements, and then also we'll try to get the evidence from the DEQ presented. So for the opening statements, since everyone has filed pre-hearing information, I'd like us to try to keep the opening statements to 10 minutes, if possible, so we can keep moving forward. So, is this the order I should go in, Jim, for opening statements?
It's DEQ first, then Brook, and then then Lynn, then PRBC, then Jay.
Let me get that here.
It's just the order of presentation of the hearing, Mr. Chair.
I probably typed it in wrong.
Yeah, I've got here, Jim, come on over here so I can get this the right order. My apologies. So. Great, thank you. All right then, Mr. Coleman, the DEQ, would you please, if you have an opening statement, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Andrew Coleman, and I'm here on behalf of the Department of Environmental Quality. I work at the Wyoming Attorney General's Office. Also joining with me is James LaRock, also with the Wyoming Attorney General's Office. This case is about the public input provided through the objections period on the proposed Brook Mine. I will allow Brook Mine to go into greater detail about the nature of their mine, but it's a application for a new mining permit near here, just to the north of Sheridan. Prior to this case, DEQ thoroughly reviewed the Brook Mine permit application over a number of years. At the conclusion of that, they determined that it was technically adequate. The purpose of this hearing is to determine that after the public has now filed objections and provided new information, whether that permit is still technically adequate. And by technically adequate, we're referring to a permit whose contents meet the statutory and regulatory requirements. Now, the public has an opportunity to provide information to DEQ on the permit application only at the point of public comment and objections. Those objections then can lead to a hearing in front of the council, and the council now, over the next few days, will be able to make findings about the objections, information, both for them as well as in response to them, and conclusions about whether or not the permit, in light of those objections, is still technically adequate. The other parties have characterized this case as a matter of issuing or denying the permit, but the council does not need to get to that point. The statutes indicate that the director is to issue or deny the permit. There are a number of findings that have to be made under Wyoming Statute 35-11-406N, and those findings must be made by the director prior to permit issuance. Those findings also depend, though, on the content of the permit application, which objections and the new information provided through them can affect, and the council will be able to affect through this hearing and its findings. The findings that are necessary for the director to make have not been made at this time. You will hear evidence that the cumulative hydrologic impact assessment has not been finalized or issued or signed at this point. You will also hear that the bond for reclamation purposes has not been set at this point, nor do they need to be, because both of those items depend upon the content of the permit application. And the objections could potentially allow for modifications of that substance. Those issues, once those findings are made, can be heard by the council at that time. But it's not necessary for the council to worry about those at this point or to try to make those findings on their own. The department believes that, has reviewed the public objections and also believes that even after reviewing those objections, the permit does remain technically adequate. There are things that the objections have identified that could be improvements upon the application, but they are not deficiencies that would prevent the issuance of the permit. And there is a common method used by the department to correct things such as this, improvements that come up through the public objections period. And that is to place a permit condition on an issued permit requiring a permit revision to be filed by the applicant within a specified time after the permit is issued and prior to mining. This allows the minor issues to be corrected in a timely manner and allows the permitting process to go forward. DEQ plan intends to provide 4 witnesses for the council. First, Mr. B.J. Christensen, who is the permit coordinator for Brook Mine, is going to help introduce the volumes of the permit application. He will also talk about several sections of the permit application that he is familiar with. He will talk about the permit review process, as well as pre-application activities that Brook had with DEQ prior to issuing or to filing their application. He will talk about the geology of the area. He will talk about most of the contents of the mine and reclamation plans. He will talk about the subsidence control plan and the fire control plan. Mr. Matt Koontz, also with DEQ, will be providing testimony about surface water, information and issues raised in the objections, and the parts of the application that address surface water issues, both quantity and quality. Dr. Muthu Kuchinar will be testifying about the water quantity and quality, as well as groundwater modeling. And finally, Mr. Doug Emmy will be testifying about the blasting program of the department, as well as bonding for reclamation. The council has likely realized from reviewing DEQ's pre-hearing memo that there are a number of statutes and regulations that apply to the issues raised in the objections. And I will not waste time by trying to quote those here, but we refer the council to DEQ's memorandum to identify where those are. At the end of this hearing, DEQ will request the council determine that the application is technically adequate and to make any recommendations of areas of the application that should be corrected through a permit revision after the permit is issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Poe, would you please proceed?
Certainly, if you give us just one moment, Dr. Bagley, we have to move some technology into place.
Okay.
If it's all right with the council, I'd prefer to stand. I'm short enough as it is, hiding behind the desk.
That's fine.
All right, I think we're ready to go. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us for an entertaining discussion on dirt. Today we're going to be talking about the Brook Mine permit application. But I first want to start with something that's a little more understandable. Driver's license. Many of us have them. Most of you have likely seen them. They tell us that the person who has that license has passed the minimum qualifications necessary to drive a car in the state of Wyoming. Besides that, they don't really tell us a whole lot. They tell us height, weight, date of birth, address. Maybe you look like what's on the picture, maybe you don't, depending upon when it was taken. But at the end of the day, the license isn't an expansive document and review of what a person is going to do for their entire lives driving a car. There's many unknowns that factor into when a person actually gets behind the wheel of an automobile and begins to drive. Type of car. The driver's license doesn't tell you what kind of car that person is driving, but we know that the make, model, age, and technology of that car can influence how you should approach driving, how fast you should go, how slow you should go, how you should deal with turns. Likewise, that driver's license doesn't explain 10 or 15 years in the future how you're going to handle a set of mountain curves. Or if you've been driving for only 5 years, how in the middle of May, when a foot and a half of snow gets dumped on Cheyenne, how you're going to deal with that. Likewise, it doesn't explain how someone who lives their entire lives in a rural Wyoming community is going to deal with big city traffic. But it doesn't have to, because that's not what a driver's license is all about. It's about setting a minimum standard that you understand and commit to following the rules of the road. But you also don't go out there alone. There's oversight. Highway patrol, sheriffs, city police. And if you break the rules of the road, there are consequences. You get pulled over. For example, if you're trying to get back a little early from depositions in Sundance, think you can go a little faster than the speed limit, you may find out that the highway patrol says you're not allowed to do that. Lesson Mr. Sutphin and I learned the hard way. But the point is that there is someone watching to make sure that everyone with that license follows the rules of the road. I'm sure you're wondering at this point, why on earth I've been talking to you about a driver's license. We're clearly not here to talk about how to drive a car. The reason I mention it is because the principle behind a driver's license really isn't different than the principle that we're talking about over these next 5 days. The permit application for a coal mine is designed to establish a set of minimum standards that a company must meet to operate safely and in an environmentally sound way in the state of Wyoming. But unlike the driver's license test, where you just go down to the DMV, you answer a few questions, and you show them if you can make a left turn or not, the coal permitting process in the state of Wyoming is far more rigorous. As the council knows from the pre-hearing memorandum, the Wyoming Environmental Quality Act provides dozens of statutory sections that set out guidelines and rules for what a permit applicant must do. DEQ has promulgated hundreds of regulations that an applicant must meet before we get to the point we're at today. And there's over a dozen guidelines that DEQ has to guide someone through the permitting process. Now, what's on the screen is just a very, very tiny snapshot of what an applicant must follow. And you're going to see how detailed that application is. As Mr. Coleman mentioned, the witnesses from DEQ, the experts, frankly, from DEQ are going to walk you through the 13 volumes of Brook's permit application. There are tens of thousands of pages within that permit document that explain in great detail everything that Brook intends to do to meet the standards for a permit application in the state of Wyoming. Inside those 13 volumes, you're going to find detailed studies. Because after all, one of the chief purposes of the permit application process is to make sure that someone who wants to mine coal understands soil, geology, hydrogeology, climatology in the area they're going to mine, so that when they're done, they can put it back in a way that they found it. So you're going to hear from Jeff Barron, a professional engineer and expert in the permitting process, on how Brook went about doing that. You're also going to hear from Mr. Ken Woodring, the company representative from Ramaco, about how it's going to implement those studies moving forward. And you're going to see things like Brook's groundwater model, its vegetation baseline, and its assessment of alluvial valley floors. In addition to that, you're also going to learn about the lengthy review. Now, unlike the DMV, where you can maybe be in and out in a matter of hours, you're going to hear from Mr. Christensen that this process to get us to this point was years in the making. Up on the screen now is a snippet from PRBRC Exhibit 89, where Mr. Christensen explains to Alan Edwards and Todd Parfit at DEQ that it took us 3 years, 6 rounds of comments and responses. And that's the process, as the council's aware of, from the order in lieu of consent hearing, where DEQ and Brook went back and forth to improve upon the permit application. And it also involved a minimum of 20 experts across 10 different agencies just to get to this point. And lest we not forget that this council actually was involved earlier in the process to move the permit application to where we are today. But that's not the end of the process. There's much more to do. And that's an important piece for the council to consider as it hears the evidence. We're here today talking about step 1. You're going to hear evidence from some of the objectors that's talking about step 501. For example, there's oversight. As I mentioned, just like the Highway Patrol is out there, DEQ continues with Brook throughout the life of its mine. There will be annual reports, an annual recalculation of Brook's bond, and monthly inspections of the mine site to make sure that Brook is following the law. And just like the highway patrolman who ticketed Mr. Sutphin, Brook can get notices of violations, fines, and changes to its operations if it doesn't abide by its permitting requirements. And beyond that forward-looking oversight, there's also more work for Brook to do. You see here, Brook Exhibit 10D, which is part of the Mine Safety Health Administration, MSHA. I think I just butchered that, apologize. The assessment that Brook has to do in order to meet the federal standards to safely operate a mine. You're going to hear that Brook is going to be undertaking those studies and the engineering necessary to comply with that law. You're also going to hear that Brook is going to do more work at the mine site that it did as part of its permit application. It commits to monitoring water quality, commits to monitoring the streams in the area. And again, all for the purposes of putting back the land the way Brook found it when it's done mining. And as Mr. Coleman said, we think at the end of the hearing, this council should find and affirm DEQ's decision that Brook's application is technically adequate, meaning it complies with all of the relevant statutes and regulations. Now, even though there are objectors here, the objectors in Brook can at least agree on one thing. This screenshot at the bottom is from the deposition of Jill Morrison, the executive director of the Powder River Basin Resource Council. I asked her, if Brook complies with all of the statutes and regulations for a permit application in Wyoming, should it get a permit? And she said, I guess so. The objectors, however, despite agreeing with Brook on that basic principle, are here today because they conducted a very cursory review of Brook's permit application. You're going to hear over the next 5 days that many of the objectors spent little, if any, time reviewing the tens of thousands of pages of Brook's permit application. You're going to hear that in preparing their objection letters, several of the objectors didn't look at the statutes or regulations that govern a permit application in the state of Wyoming. A few of those examples are on the screen. As part of the deposition, we asked, have you reviewed the statutes? No, Jordan Sweeney, the general manager of Bighorn Coal, says. Are you familiar with the Environmental Quality Act? I know of it, says Michael Wireman, the expert for the Powder River Basin Resource Council. But that's not sufficient. The process is more rigorous. And we ultimately think the final analysis for the council boils down to this. Is the permit application technically adequate and complete? Does it comply with Wyoming law? And what that really is going to ask the council to do is decide whether the experts who spent years going through the permit, both at DEQ and Brook, did their job correctly. Because at the end of the day, we don't think we're here to talk about the substance of Brook's permit application. Instead, this is an attack upon the quality of work that DEQ did. But we think when you hear from Mr. Christensen, Mr. Coons, Mr. Emmy, and others, you're going to realize they did a great job. They put a lot of effort, and at the end of the day, it took all of that effort to get us here today where the council should find Brook's permit application is technically adequate and complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. Ms. Boofgarden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Good afternoon. With Mr. Gregerson and I here today is Mr. Jordan Sweeney, mine manager for Bighorn Coal, and then on the end of the row there, local hydrologist, Mr. Joe Gerlach. Mr. Sweeney and Mr. Gerlach will be our witnesses presenting evidence this week. Bighorn's primary concern with Brook's mine permit application is simple and straightforward. The permit application at step 1 fails to satisfy the fundamental statutory and regulatory requirement referenced multiple places in the rules and regulations that Brook must know and understand the actual on-the-ground hydrologic conditions in the area in which they propose high wall mining. And they have to know those actual conditions so that Brook can ensure that those hydrologic conditions will not be materially impaired. Without knowing and understanding the site-specific hydrologic conditions, it simply is impossible for Brook to adequately consider the impacts of its proposed high wall mining operations as the law requires at step 1. Brook argues that DEQ's determination that the mine permit was technically adequate and suitable for publication satisfies Brook's statutory obligation to demonstrate prior to permit approval that its permit application does 4 things. First, that it's accurate and complete. Second, that Brook can accomplish reclamation as is required by the Environmental Quality Act. Third, that mining as Brook has proposed has been designed in the first instance to prevent material damage to the hydrologic balance outside the permit area. And fourth, that the permit application otherwise complies with the Environmental Quality Act and all applicable state laws. DEQ disagrees with Brook on this point. So does Bighorn Coal. Nothing in the statute at issue in this case, Wyoming Statute 3511-406N, creates a presumption that Brook's application was approvable upon Mr. Christensen sending a letter to Brook that his permit application was technically adequate and suitable for publication. I know you're all familiar with the statute. For your convenience, we put the statutory language I just referenced on the screen. As you can see, there's absolutely nothing in that statute that permits Brook to shift its burden of proof to the objectors. The statute very specifically states that as the applicant, Brook has the burden of establishing that its permit application is in compliance with the law. The statute can't be any clearer that no coal mining permit may be approved unless the applicant affirmatively demonstrates that the specific listed requirements have been satisfied. Contrary to Mr. Pope's assertion, Bighorn carefully reviewed the portions of the materials that were made available through publication for public review and comment, and noted the fundamental hydrologic deficiencies. Brook must demonstrate that Bighorn's wrong. In response, Brook argues that state law requires very little detail in the permit application. We just heard Mr. Pope make that argument. And in supporting the argument, Brook logically jumps to the characteristics of an approved mine permit as a living, dynamic document that allows Brook to mine first and answer questions and address problems later. According to Brook, DEQ's oversight and enforcement authority over an approved permit is sufficient to ensure that any future problems will be identified and corrected. The Environmental Quality Act and the Land Quality Division rules and regulations require much more in a mine permit application than Brook is willing to acknowledge. For example, the law requires that Brook determine probable hydrologic consequences both within and outside the permit area prior to permit approval. Brook can't make that determination accurately or completely as is required by the statute if it hasn't obtained and analyzed critical site-specific information. Brook can't make that determination accurately or completely and determine probable hydrologic consequences, whereas here it is neglected to consider data establishing that the overburden above the proposed high wall cuts is not native overburden, as they've presumed or assumed in their permit application, but rather is composed of previously mined porous backfill that's saturated with groundwater, and that's saturated with groundwater that's connected to, hydrologically connected to the Tongue River and Goose Creek. The evidence at hearing, including the evidence of hydrologist Joe Gerlach, will demonstrate that given Brook's total disregard of the known prior mining activity and overburden and hydrologic conditions in Brook's proposed mine Trench 1 area, Brook has not credibly demonstrated the probable hydrologic consequences of its proposed mine operations, or that any such consequences that would occur would not be irreparable, excuse me. If Brook were being intellectually honest, it would acknowledge that its permit application requirements are separate and distinct from the operational performance standards and the kind of flexibility that permittees have under the law to amend a previously approved permit application to address new or unforeseen circumstances. And then the importance of DEQ's oversight and enforcement role during the operational period. Notably, Bighorn doesn't seek to deny Brook an opportunity to mine in Sheridan County. However, as the owner of land, infrastructure, and coal rights, both within Brook's proposed mine permit area and adjacent to Brook's proposed operations, Bighorn is legally entitled to expect that Brook's mine permit application is accurate, complete, complies with the law, and that prior to permit approval, that application demonstrates that the proposed operation is not expected to irreparably harm the land and water, including Bighorn's property. The number of rounds of technical review, the number of years that it took Brook to prepare a mine permit application that was deemed by DEQ to be technically adequate and suitable for publication, the number of volumes or pages in that permit application, or the number of emails exchanged between DEQ reviewers and Brook over that time frame do not make Brook's permit application any more or less approvable. The simple fact is, Brook wouldn't rely so heavily on the arguments that Mr. Pope just made if Brook could point the council and the objectors to substantive information that addresses the multiple asserted permit application deficiencies. For all these reasons, at the conclusion of this hearing, Brook will request that the council, Bighorn will request that the council will require Brook to gather and analyze the critical information missing in its mine permit application and make the necessary demonstrations. Brook must be required to submit this critical baseline data and risk analysis to DEQ for review prior to DEQ preparing its written findings and issuing a state decision document on Brook's permit application. Finally, consistent with DEQ's established practice, as Mr. Kuhlman just explained, of applying permit conditions to ensure that all technical problems are addressed prior to mining, Bighorn will request that the council determine that specific permit conditions must be included in any approved Brook mine permit in order to mitigate the risk that Brook's proposed operations will cause irreparable environmental harm on Bighorn's lands and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baumgarten. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Anderson, and I'm a staff attorney for the Powder River Basin Resource Council. Welcome to Sheridan. As a native, I hope you enjoy your stay and explore the area a bit, which will give you an appreciation of why our members who live here care so much about our county. I have with me today some of our members, including Jillian Malone, a board member of ours who enjoys recreating and spending time near the permit area, and Anton Bosek and John Buyak, member of ours who live near the proposed mine. All of them will be providing testimony to you later this week. Some of our other local members are in the audience today to support our efforts. I also have with me Jill Morrison, our organization's executive director and longtime community organizer. We will be joined later this week by Jerry Marino, our geotechnical engineer expert, and Mike Wireman, our hydrogeologist expert, both of whom will provide expert testimony about concerns they have with the permit application and opinions they have reached about why it is not technically adequate. We want to start off by addressing the argument we know is coming. Ramaco and Brook Mine are going to try and paint our organization as an activist group that is opposed to coal, no matter the merits. They want you to believe that we don't have good cause for being here today. We've seen that tactic before, and you should not fall for it. This is the first coal permit we have challenged before the EQC at a hearing in quite some time. Some of you may remember the last coal permit we challenged. It was actually a research and development license for Link Energy. Link is now in bankruptcy, and its projects in Australia are the source of the largest contamination cleanup ever in Queensland. Now, before opposing counsel jumps to the conclusions of the relevance about that, we don't bring Link up for its relevance. We mention it to you to demonstrate that we are selective about what projects our organization questions and challenges, and as a nonprofit with limited resources, we are especially selective about what projects we put legal and financial resources into challenging before this council. As you will hear, we retained well-known and well-respected experts with impeccable credentials. They are scientists familiar with the standards of peer review and what data is necessary to make good decisions. We asked them to review the permit application and associated materials without a predetermined outcome in mind. We honestly wanted to know whether our organization and our members should be concerned about this large industrial project coming into our backyard. And the answer we got back from both of them was a resounding yes. Yes, we should be concerned, they told us. And that answer led us to seek answers to our questions and concerns from the regulators, including you. Which brings me to discussing what this proceeding is all about for our organization. Having been denied our request for an informal conference, this hearing is now our only opportunity to voice our concerns to you, the regulatory agency in charge of making a decision on whether the company has met its burden to allow DEQ to grant or deny the permit application. Your role under Section 406P of the Environmental Quality Act is to determine whether Ramaco has met its burden to ensure this coal mine application has met the standards of the law, is technically sound, and based on the proper science-based conclusions, and that it will not threaten the health, safety, and welfare of nearby landowners and recreationists. This week-long trial-like hearing is not the most citizen-friendly venue to provide these comments and concerns. And with that in mind, we ask you to give the citizens who are going to testify a little latitude. This is now the only forum they have to raise their concerns with you and with the company. Although it may not look like it, and it certainly doesn't feel like it to them, in essence, this is the only public comment hearing they have had on this proposal. Unfortunately, as opposed to informally meeting with them to see if the company could address their concerns, Ramaco has greeted these citizens with deposition subpoenas and invasive discovery requests and subjected them to hours of questioning about their motives and technical knowledge. As of earlier today, they also tried to kick out their voice at the proceeding altogether. So they might be a bit nervous and shaken when they testify before you later this week. This is an intimidating process, but these citizens have checked that intimidation at the door because they feel so strongly about the need to raise their voice. This project is expected to mine coal for at least the next 12 years. With 10 years of statutorily required reclamation monitoring, that means a presence from the company for at least 22 years. You can raise a kid and send her to college in that time frame. So for the next generation, this company will be a neighbor to our members who live just north of here in the scenic and historic Tongue River Valley. And because of that, our members, and in turn our organization, have a keen interest in ensuring this company will be a good neighbor. We have an interest in making sure the permit application is complete, updated, and accurate as required by the law, as a good permit application is necessary for good inspection and enforcement oversight by DEQ that Mr. Jeff Pope mentioned. After the permit is approved, DEQ can't issue a notice of violation. There isn't a permit condition or term to violate. And we have a significant interest in making sure the permit application and conditions of the permit appropriately address all legal requirements related to subsidence prevention and remediation, hydrologic protection, blasting, water replacement and restoration, and bonding, among many other serious issues. We ask you to consider the following question. If this mine was proposed within a half mile of your home, wouldn't you want the permit to meet those requirements too? You've heard a lot already today about the scope of DEQ's review, and it will likely be a common refrain the whole week from Ramaco and DEQ. Look at all of this paper, think of all the time, and on and on. But we ask you to think of the substance. Details matter. Some really complex technical details, like how to use formulas to calculate the likelihood of subsidence, or how to adequately characterize hydrologic systems, and some more general and common details, like how many trucks will haul coal and what roads will be impacted, and how often will blasting happen, and how will the company ensure that blasting doesn't impact neighbors, or even the most basic of all, how much coal are you going to mine, and where is it going to go, and what facilities are necessary to make that happen. All of those details are missing or are technically inadequate in the permit application. Now, you're also going to hear a lot from DEQ and Ramaco that DEQ normally does this or DEQ normally signs off on that, so trust us and everything will be okay. But the fact is District 3 of the Land Quality Division has never done this before. That is, they have never permitted a high wall mine before. And they certainly have never done that in an area acknowledged to have active subsidence and active coal fires and abandoned mine sites. Consequences matter here. As discussed in the objections, and as you'll hear from the citizens testifying later this week, this area has tremendous scenic value and high recreational use. It has complex hydrological systems that are critical to local agriculture, and it has homes in close proximity to the mine. We have to get this one right. We can't just cross our fingers and hope everything will work out. The words on all of that paper matter. As we stated from the beginning, our presence before you this week is not driven by some anti-coal agenda or even an anti-Ramaco vendetta. Our presence and actions are exactly what yours would be if your home was near a new proposed coal mine in a sensitive area with active subsidence, coal fires, and great concerns over water use and impacts. And that is to demand that when this company mines coal in the Tongue River Valley, that it does it responsibly and in a manner that will ensure this mine will be a good neighbor for the next generation to come. We know you will help us achieve that objective through these proceedings, and we thank you for your time and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Gilberts.
Thank you. My name is Jay Gilberts from Yonke and Toner. It's my pleasure to represent David and Mary Fisher, stand up, please, who are here today. The Fishers are homeowners out in this area. In the map, or the aerial that you see right here, their house is just slightly off of the photo to the right in that particular area. Wanted to start by saying our proceedings this week, I want to be clear, they're not about whether we're going to reject a mine or not. It's going to be about being careful, about being thoughtful. And it's most importantly about being careful, thoughtful, and scientific about these hydrology and subsidence issues. That is the important thing. This spot, this photo you see, it lies right at the base and adjacent to the Brook mine application and where they propose to do their mining. It's just a few short miles up Interstate 90. You can see Interstate 90 up in the left-hand corner cutting through the hill. And the interstate drops down and it cuts right through where the mine is planned and right in this particular area you're looking at. I grew up in Gillette on a cattle ranch, so I get away with saying this. The coal mines in Gillette are one thing. Coal mines dug in vast, endless expanses of rangeland. This is not open rangeland like down in Gillette. This is a very special and unique place. Just up the river from this site is the site of the Connor battlefield, where Connor engaged Black Bear and the Arapaho in their village where they camped in this valley. And the running battle that ensued as the Arapaho attacked and Connor attempted retreat ran right through the photo that you're looking at. Just up there also is the site of the Sawyer expedition and where it camped and was attacked by the natives. Just below this photo is where General Crook bivouacked and prepared his armies to march a short distance up north and engage in the Battle of the Rosebud. You're probably all aware that just south of town, within a couple of miles, we have the historic wagon box fight and the place where Red Cloud engaged in his military victory of the Fetterman Massacre. Why is it that the native peoples fought so hard in this place? Why did they fight so hard in this place when so many vast tracts of land had been taken away from them? And it is because it is a very special place. It's not just a place. This valley is home to turkeys. It is home to, on the Fisher's property right now, a nesting crane. Just up the creek from them, a bald eagle nesting in the same tree with blue herons nesting. It is a trout fishery. It has everything that the largest river in northeast Wyoming can have associated with it. And it is a place where the people are tied to the land as well, where the people in this valley measure their water rights in terms longer than the state of Wyoming. Territorial water rights run up and down that entire valley, where the water rights existed before the state did. It's an important place. And the Fishers are just average landowners in this group. And they've been thrust because there hasn't been an opportunity for public comment into these contested, expensive proceedings. And we're going to rely on some of the well-qualified experts of other folks to talk to you about these hydrology issues. And what you're going to see, what's going to be proven to you, is that the Tone River that you see in this photo, the Goose Creek that comes in just below this, Slater Creek that comes in just below this, these drainages, these rivers in this process, in this landscape, are not half pipes of water flowing through the land, but they are systems. They're systems. They're tied to these alluvial valley floors that are protected so prominently in surface mining. Those alluvial valley floors are in turn tied to the outlying aquifer systems, which include the coal seams filled with water that will be dewatered and mined through by Brook under its plan. We'll show you that there have been insufficient studies done to understand how these complex hydrological systems operate together. That will be through Mr. Wireman, a highly qualified man who's worked in hydrology and mining for decades. As a result, there is insufficient information upon which to determine that this proposed mine will not harm this complex water system and the alluvial valley floors that are tied to it. Without understanding how these systems work together, Brook cannot demonstrate that it won't harm, and most certainly can't demonstrate what it will do if it does harm. Mr. Wireman will explain to you that there are certain types of damages that can be done to this water system that cannot be undone no matter the price tag. We're going to prove to you the same is true about the subsidence. Subsidence in this area is not a matter of speculation, it's a matter of historical fact. There is abandoned mine lot projects out here that the DEQ has spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on just to address some of the very worst of the situation. The underground mines that were done in Europe in the early part of the 1900s are subsiding terribly. Subsidence is a known problem. And what you're going to hear is that the necessary, careful scientific work to understand what the risk of subsidence will be when Brook tunnels its high wall miner underground into the coal seam and pulls it back out and creates an underground cavity with all the overburden over it have not been done. They have not been done with a sufficient degree for us to understand what the risk of subsidence is, how much there will be, and most importantly, we can't understand how much work we would have to do if it happens. So we haven't predicted the environmental outcomes, and we can. It just requires more work. And he will also explain that based on the limited information that we have, he has to conclude the risk of subsidence in this area is high, that there will be subsidence problems with the new Brook mine, just as there were with the old. And the other thing that has been left out of this is as they blast to create their trench for this purposes, what will those underground shock waves do to those already and oftentimes nearby underground old workings? Will they cause further subsidence and an exacerbation of a problem that already exists in the old workings? So what we have for us before us in this hearing are that the issues of hydrology and the issues of subsidence and geology are obscured from us. They're in a black bag, a black velvet bag. Now they're obscured from us only because Brook has not tended to the necessary studies. We can. Just additional studies need to be done, and that is hydrology studies and geology studies to quantify what is in the bag. If we know what is in the bag, if we unveil it, then we can know what the risks are to the hydrology. We can know what the risks are to the geology, and then we can engage in a reasoned assessment of, is it worth the risk? Is the risk too high? Is the damage that may occur so permanent that it cannot be fixed? Or is the answer that the risks are acceptable and that the likely ramifications can be remedied? These are things that we need to find out. And we can then make these reasoned decisions about fully and scientifically assessing the risks and understanding them. And scientifically predicting the likely problems and consequences, deciding if it's worth the risk, and determining what the cost to fix anything that's broken or harmed in the process might be, thereby setting the bonds. But what Brook asks you to do is to turn the Environmental Quality Act on its head, to say, trust us, the stuff that's in the black box, this ancient artifact that's in the black bag, don't worry, it's not fragile. We can drive our mining equipment through it. We can hit it with our picks and our hammers. And don't worry, if we break it, we can fix it. And as you're going to hear from some folks, both the subsidence and the water folks, some of it can't be fixed. There are times that there are consequences that cannot be fixed. To use Mr. Pope's example, this is as if the person shows at the driver's license bureau and says, I don't need to take that vision test, I see just fine. Look, 2 fingers. And we put them on the road. Don't worry, there's cops on the road. Don't worry, I have insurance, so all this can be fixed later. There are some consequences of accidents which cannot be fixed. At the end of this, we will ask you to send this back for more study, to find that these things that were in this bag, that they be studied and revealed. It can be done, and it needs to be done in relation to this very special place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Need a break. So now we'll begin with the evidence. We will have the DEQ go first. A lot of the evidence that you present, I imagine, will be of value to all parties. So definitely, I'd like to have you go first. And so, Mr. Coleman, would you please call your first witness?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could just have 2 minutes to just
You
get
may have
everything organized.
2 minutes. Let's make that 5 minutes. Anyone who needs a bio break, please take that too. Back at it. Mr. Bowman, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The department will call its first witness, Mr. BJ Christensen, who is sitting up here for us already. Mr. Christensen,
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
please state your full name for the record.
My name is Bjarne Christensen, also known as BJ.
What is your current job?
Currently, I work for the Land Quality Division of Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. I'm a geologist, work as such, as well as the Assistant District Supervisor for District 3 here in Sheridan.
What are your general duties in your current position?
General duties in the current position is to oversee geology, hydrology, and some of the other aspects of mining and permit details that have to be worked on in areas that are not quite as related to coal as I was used to back earlier when I first joined the DEQ. A lot of these areas we have some information that has to be pulled together for permits, and I pull a lot of this information together primarily and take this information and utilize it in a permit-making process.
What's your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in geology and history.
And you mentioned work prior to coming to DEQ. Can you tell us about that?
Indeed. When I graduated from college, I went to work for a company called Peter Kiewit Sons. And I worked for the Kiewit Company for 25 years as a geologist, as an exploration geologist. I spent 15 years on drilling rigs, exploring the western United States in most of the coal-producing areas. And I also worked for 10 years in a coal mine as both a geologist and as a support specialist for determining some of the different pit justifications, alignments, and also worked as a surveyor and some other jobs that was put together. We were people with many hats in those days.
About how long have you worked in the mining industry?
About 45 years.
Are you a licensed geologist in Wyoming?
I am. I'm a professional geologist, certified by the state of Wyoming.
As part of your job with the department, do you review mine permit applications?
I do.
Do you review coal mine permit applications?
I do.
How about other types of mines?
Also other kinds of mines.
Can you tell us a little bit
The
about
other kinds of mines, primarily uranium in this day and age. We also review smaller mines, gravel operations, scoria pits, all those smaller mines that are mom and pop kind of organizations and still have to live with their rules and regulations, but we also review those pretty heavily.
About how many applications related to coal mines have you reviewed?
That would be 10 to 12 over the last 3.5 to 4 years.
And how long have you been with the department?
I've been with the department since May 20th, 2013.
About how often do you work on permit applications related to coal mines?
Pretty frequently. We have a lot of applications from coal mines for various and sundry reasons. There may be amendments being put in or major findings that have taken place that have to have in-depth detail and in-depth analysis performed. And so I work to help some of the permit coordinators fulfill the goal of checking out the geology, the hydrology, how everything works together. We're 2 to 3 or 4 a year, depending upon how much the workload is.
Can you describe some of the types of permit applications related to coal mines you've worked on? I guess
some of the amendments and other types, you mean, major influences or?
What kinds of applications are there that you've reviewed?
That I've reviewed? Straightforward permit applications, amendments to coal mines, major revisions to coal mines, minor revisions to coal mines, annual reports, those.
Do those follow a similar process?
They do. They all follow the same basic process.
Do those require public input?
They do at one point.
Can you briefly describe the application review process that DEQ goes through?
Certainly. Part of the application review process starts prior to receiving the application. In many cases, we will get with the operator, assist them in cases if they need to do some exploration work. Many times they will be granted what's known as a coal notification or a CN, so they can do exploration drilling and exploration coring for coal mines or other kinds of mines. And in these notifications, they're allowed to utilize their resources to determine where the coal is at, what will happen with the coal, how wet or dry is the coal, and can put together a lot of the information they'll need for their baseline. At about the point in time they have sufficient baseline, determined by our in-house experts, they will then send us a permit application. When we receive that application, we have to check it for completeness. How complete is this as related to the statutes, rules, and regulations? And so we go over the entire permit application, every bit and piece of that permit application, to determine whether it is complete or not, based on the legal ramifications and the necessities imbued by the rules and regulations and the statutes.
What is the department checking for when it reviews completeness of an application?
There are sections to a permit application that are defined by law. And what we're looking for is every one of those sections in place. Do we have a volume 1 with adjudication? Do we have volume 2 with further adjudication or other things? Do we have volumes 4, 5, 6, 7, depending upon what they may consist of? We have to ensure that they're all there and all available for the researchers. And so we ensure that every one of those documents and the parts of those documents, not each document isn't just a single whole. They're composed of a series of parts of documents that address different bits and pieces of the statutes, the rules, and regulations. And so what we have to do is go through these individual books, determine whether or not the materials in there are available and present as they need to be, and then determine the completeness based on that.
After the department has determined an application is complete, what happens next?
We send the mining company a notification that we have deemed their application complete and have gone into the review process. The review process is 150 days long by statute, and we analyze the entire document from front to back cover and determine how technically accurate this can possibly be. Are some of the completeness, in other words, some of the completeness items as technically accurate as they need to be, or do they need to be beefed up with some further work or research?
Does the department communicate its thoughts about the technical completeness to the operator?
Yes, we do.
How does it do that?
Okay, we put together our comments in a series of comments from all of our experts that we utilize and send those comments after the first round to the operator for his diagnosis, try to answer the different comments that are brought up, attempt to create data if no data existed in a particular area, find it, examine it, use it when needed. In short, all the bits and pieces that they talked about in the application need to be put together based on our commentary now. So they now have a different direction, a sense of direction, and a different way of looking at the permit based on what we've told them they have to look at. These would all be considered pieces of information that either need clarification, correction, modification in one way, shape, or form.
How many rounds of comments and responses are there in the permit review process?
That varies from permit to permit. This particular permit had 6 rounds of comments and responses.
When do the rounds of comments and responses end?
When we finally deem the permit to be technically accurate.
And what is meant by technically, I guess, accurate, as you mentioned?
After we examine the entire document and find that there are no longer any issues existing as compared to what the statutes, the rules, and the regulations require, we make sure that the document fits into those categories, that it does have a life that can be utilized during the life of mine, that it has information in it that can be utilized during the life of mine, at least based on what the mine plan and the reclamation plan say today.
What happens after the department determines that an application is technically accurate?
It then goes to, a notification goes to the local publications, such as the newspaper in a town in the area of where the permit is going to be applied. It goes in for 4 weeks, or I should say 4 different publication periods, a week apart. And then there's 30 days after the last publication for the public comment period to continue. So the public can comment on this from the first day it goes into publication till 30 days after the last publication. So that, for all intents and purposes, they have approximately 7 weeks to do this.
Is that the normal time when the public's input can be provided?
It is, and it's defined by statute.
Does DEQ just have one person review the application?
No, we utilize many of our in-house experts to review the permit applications.
How many different experts might DEQ use to evaluate a permit application?
On this particular permit, we used 11 in-house experts and 4 out-of-house experts, others that are not LQD.
Is there a person who keeps track of the review process on DEQ's end?
Yes, there is. That would be the permit coordinator.
Can you describe the role of a permit coordinator?
The permit coordinator is primary responsibility is to ensure that all the responses, the comments that are taking place find a central place to be housed. What the permit coordinator has to do is take the disparate pieces of information that are being returned by the experts in the field, whether it be vegetation or wildlife, geology or hydrology, and bring them all together in one single place. They can be then inserted into the mine plan and the rec plan, as well as the appendices that lead into those things. So essentially, it's a coordinating position where you bring all the information together in one spot, put it all together to make sure it flows, to make sure it follows the statutes, rules, and regulations, and then put it in the document when it's time.
Does the permit coordinator's role end after the application process?
No, it doesn't. The permit coordinator stays with that permit for as long a period of time as is necessary or deemed by LQD to be necessary.
Have you been served as a permit coordinator?
I have.
How often?
I have served as a permit coordinator for this particular property for 4 years.
Okay. Have you been permit coordinator for any other permits?
I have. I also am the permit coordinator, or was the permit coordinator for the Wyodak mine and the Dry Fork mine, as well as the rare elements prospect that was over near Sundance.
Is the Wyodak mine another coal mine?
It is.
You mentioned that you've been permit coordinator for this permit. By that, do you mean the Brook mine permit application?
Absolutely, yes.
And how long have you been the permit coordinator?
For 4 years.
At what stage in the application process did you get involved with the Brook mine as a permit coordinator?
I got involved very close to the beginning when they were operating underneath the CN, when they were doing their early preliminary exploration work, and during their attempt to set up their water monitoring systems, determine where most of the holes needed to be drilled to tell them the information that they needed. By and large, I got involved in the last 2/3 of the exploration program.
Can you briefly describe the proposed Brook mine?
The Brook mine is about 8 miles north of here, just north of the interstate, in an area that is immediately adjacent to the Tongue River and some of the other state highways, as well as the interstate, like I mentioned before. It consists of rock units that are of varying ages, predominantly about 50 million years old. And these rocks were deposited in a swamp 50 million years ago. And these deposits in the swamp that were laid in place for many, many millions of years began to get coalified. And over time, these deposits become much more coalified and much better quality coal than may be seen in the past. On top of those, we get a lot of sequences of sands and shales and clays that get washed into the coal swamp during periods of flood. And so what you'll have is a very thick coal sequence that exists in the unit, and then you get these sequences of sandstone and shale above it whenever the environment gets higher energy, such as during flood periods. These rock units are exposed and outcrop north of town up here, 8 miles north of town in the Brook Mine permit area. And they have been studied by Brook Mine to determine what they need to do for their mining applications.
How big is the proposed mine?
About 4,550 acres.
And what mining methods are proposed for the mine?
Currently, it's going to be a high wall mine, and by and large, about 95% of the mine. There's a very small area that they're going to treat as a surface mine because there's some remnant coal up there they can access from the surface in a small area that they can get started in, but it will be predominantly a high wall mine.
Can you briefly describe what you mean by a high wall mine?
A high wall mine is a mine where you have to develop a high wall, obviously, to approach with a high wall miner. What you generally do is you'll take a trench, a box cut, as we used to call those, remove all the overburden from the box cut, obviously mine the coal out of the box cut, and then bring a high wall mining unit down into the bottom of the pit. You then insert a series of drifts with a high wall miner into the coal and follow the coal in this case, probably about 2,000 feet each time. On different segments as you push your way down into the coal bed. We also leave bits and pieces between the coal extensions, between the drifts. So we have solidity and solid structure in that mined area. So we have to prevent subsidence at the same time we're mining.
What's the predicted life of the Brook mine?
Right now, 12 to 13 years.
And who's the operator? Or who's the applicant?
Yeah, the Brook Mine is the applicant, Brook Mining Company.
Can you give us a brief description of the timeline of DEQ's work on the permit application?
Like I said, I began with this during the exploration phase in May of 2013. The exploration continued throughout 2013 and most of 2014. They were gathering the information on the rock units, like I said, putting in monitor wells, observation wells, putting together their plan of attack to determine how they were going to mine this coal, should that time ever come. Approximately end of October 2014, they submitted the mine permit application, which we found complete on November 3rd, 2014, and began our first round of analysis of that particular permit application. It then began to move through our processes, went through the first 150 days, comments were sent to the mining company, and those comments were treated and sent back with their responses. We again reviewed the mining permit application with those new responses now in place, went back through the process of determining what we needed to require once again. Did they meet certain conditions in this place where we asked them to? Did they solve some of the issues that we thought we saw over in this area? Did they take care of all the comments that we sent to them in a way that was statutorily and rule and regulation compliant? This period took approximately a year and a half.
You mentioned that there were 6 rounds of comments in the technical review.
Yes.
When did the department determine that the application was technically adequate?
We determined in early December that the permit was technically adequate, December of 2016.
When was it published for public comment?
The first public comment period opened with the publication, I think it was December 7th that year.
Who were the folks at DEQ who worked on reviewing the application?
The specific individuals. Okay. We had Mr. Doug Emmy that worked with me on the blasting part, the blasting component of the mine plan, as well as bonding. Doug is our primary bond analyst, as well as our primary blasting analyst. He is a world-renowned expert in this, so I will defer a lot of the blasting comments to him later. We had Miss Stacy Page, who is no longer with us, that evaluated the vegetation. We had myself, that I did the geology and some of the hydrogeology. And some of the other hydrogeology was done by Mr. Mutu Kuchinar and Matt Coombs, who will be testifying later. We had a series of individuals that we asked for assessment of the mine permit application outside of DEQ. We asked Game and Fish to be our wildlife specialists to examine the wildlife section, also the Fish and Wildlife Service, also to examine the wildlife section. We asked the Army Corps of Engineers to look at our wetlands section to determine how robust it was and whether it was meeting various sundry requirements in federal law. Let's see, who else do we have? Drawing a blank right now.
How were particular folks picked to review particular parts of the application?
Primarily based on their expertise. And we've been hiring people in individual areas of expertise. When I was hired, for example, it was for exploration and prospecting, as well as mining, related to geology. Others, such as Doug Emmy, and I talked about, had been a blaster and a blasting foreman at a mine in Montana. Obviously, the outside commenters that we had, the Game and Fish and the others, are experts in their own rights. We tend to hire individuals that have expertise in these different disparate areas. So we have an expert in vegetation. We have an expert in some of the other aspects. We have engineers that are taking looks at some of the mining plan sequences. And we have a sequence of individuals that look at this in their area of expertise and then draw conclusions from that particular area.
Who oversaw the decisions made on the Brook mining application?
There was a group of individuals. I primarily oversaw most of the decisions that were involved with minor issues that were in the permit application, some other issues that I'm an expert at within the mine permit application. Occasionally, we did have to ask for other people's input. For example, sometimes it exceeded my pay grade. It would go higher than me in the DEQ chain of command, where we needed some decision makers to give us approval for some things that we weren't quite sure on. So in some instances, we utilized the folks in Cheyenne to give us the information we needed on a higher level than we were able to dictate ourselves.
Who oversaw the permit application in Cheyenne?
That would be Mr. Alan Edwards, who is the Deputy Director of Department of Environmental Quality and worked as the LQD administrator during the period of time we were utilizing him for this particular permit.
Is he the normally the land quality administrator?
No, he is not.
Who's that?
That would be Mr. Kyle Wentland.
Has he been involved with the Brook mine permit application decisions?
He is not.
What other duties does Mr. Alan Edwards have with the department?
In addition to being the Deputy Director, he is also the administrator of the Abandoned Mine Lands project, or the Abandoned Mine Lands, just went blank, division.
Looking back at the permit review for this permit, what tools did DEQ use when it was evaluating the technical adequacy of the application?
Well, some of the principal tools that we utilized were modeling systems that are commonly in place for both the geology and hydrology aspects of this. There were other tools that are utilized in general in mining practices, engineering principles that were utilized, formulas and different kinds of results that come out of those formulas. How efficient is the rock units to bear weight, for example, or what kind of materials exist above or below the coal. And so what we utilized is a lot of mathematics and some modeling software that's been recognized industrially and nationally as what we consider to be world-class software. So the things like ModFlow for hydrology that the USGS utilizes, and other types of modelers that the EPA utilizes in a lot of their work. The models that we use and the applications we use are all approved generally by large governmental agencies or private agencies that utilize this in their day-to-day work. So they've been agreed upon by many individuals in all aspects of mining and engineering and geology.
Did the department look at statutes when reviewing the Brook mine application?
We did, absolutely.
Did the department look at regulations?
We did.
Generally, what regulations did the department review for this application?
A lot of the regulations come out of our coal chapter 2. There's a lot of definition in there as to the different pieces of information we need to put together a mine permit. We also utilize statute 3511-406 in entirety because it presents in a statutory manner all of the bits and pieces of information that must be in a coal mine application. That is probably the ground-based regulation that we primarily fall back on. There are also other chapters that we utilize bits and pieces of them. For example, we utilize Chapter 7, Section 2 for some of the subsidence. And we utilize some other chapters as they were related to this particular permit application.
Did the department look at any land quality division guidelines?
We did. We looked at several guidelines. We have a large number of guidelines that cover a lot of different aspects of mining. We utilize these, for example, for hydrology. There's a guideline for hydrology. There are other guidelines for vegetation and guidelines for wildlife and guidelines for everything you can possibly think of for putting a permit application together. A viable stand-up permit application. And so those guidelines we utilize strongly. We suggest them strongly and utilize them strongly in this process.
Are the guidelines are the guidelines binding law?
No, they're not.
Are they the measure by which the department determines if an application is technically adequate?
No, they're not.
You mentioned earlier, we talked about the rounds of comments in the technical review process. I'd like you to take the binder next to you that's got tabs inside of it and turn to the tab for DEQ Exhibit 34.
Okay.
Do you know what this document is?
This is the index of change to the actual permit application throughout its round of commentary and response.
How many rounds of comments does this document show comments and responses of?
6 rounds of comments and responses.
What, just kind of generally, what kinds of issues did the comments address?
There were groundwater issues that showed up. Not so much groundwater issues, but difficulties sometimes in finding enough water to get water wells to work efficiently. There were instances of, for example, geologic, lithologic logs that were put into place that appeared to have, in some cases, difficult descriptions of particular materials that were in place. And the descriptors were, in some cases, too short. And we asked for larger, longer descriptors so we could determine what the material was exactly as best we could down there. There were other, for example, we were looking into descriptors of some of the stream beds in that particular area, some of the draws that existed there. We wanted them to flesh out some of the descriptions on a lot of the draws that were there and give us a better sense, an idea of what they consisted of.
Did the comments in Exhibit 34, do those require changes to the application?
These comments, these were the comments that came in and produced changes in the application. And the changes were cataloged right here inside this.
Did the applicant's responses to DEQ's comments satisfy all DEQ's comments?
Ultimately, they did, yes.
At the end of the technical review, did Brook Mine's application meet the statutory and regulatory requirements for a surface coal mining permit application?
Would you please rephrase that?
After the applicant satisfied DEQ's technical comments, did the application meet the statutory and regulatory requirements?
It did. That's why it was deemed technically adequate.
Okay. I'll start taking a look at the contents of the application. I can have you go ahead and put away Exhibit 34. We'll next take a look at Exhibit DEQ1.
Okay.
And can you tell me what that document is?
This is what's called the adjudication volume. The adjudication volume is the area where we begin to put together the information on all the different legal aspects of ownership, legal aspects of water rights, all legal aspects of right-of-ways, all the different legal parts of this permit application are put together in this adjudication section. So we can define who is with who, what are the different bits and pieces of utilization of these lands that may be related to some kind of statutes, what is county, what is state, what is federal. It all gets put together here in this one particular document. So all the legal descriptions and all the legal relationships are in here.
Are there other parts of the application?
Yes, there are. There are further parts.
About how many different volumes such as that are there of the application?
In this case, there are 12 volumes.
All right, I'll have you turn to page Bates numbered on the corner, DEQ 1-002. And I'll note for the council's purposes to jump to the pages, the Bates number for DEQ is corresponding with the PDF number. So you can just type in the page number. Can you tell me what this page is?
This is an index of change sheet,
What does it show?
and it shows changes to the adjudication volume itself. And so what it does is it puts in the entry that needs to be removed, or the part of the permit application that needs to be removed, the part of the application needs to be replaced or augmented, and then what the description of the change itself is.
Is that the changes list, is that updated over time?
It is.
I'll have you turn to page DEQ 1-044. Can you tell me what this page is?
This is the table of contents for all of the volumes of the permit application.
Can you describe generally how the permit, how a permit application like this is organized?
It is organized in kind of an outline manner. The very first volume, as I mentioned, deals with the adjudication, the legal aspects of the permit application area, and the aspects of the interrelationships in that particular area. The second volume in this particular case was a volume for the maps. The adjudication can produce a lot of maps, ownership maps, right-of-way maps, and that kind of thing. And so the second adjudication volume was simply all of the maps related to the narrative in the first volume. The third volume in this case consists of 4 different areas. The first appendix is bases itself on the use of the land ever since anybody knows, all the way through written history to the present. The second one is primarily the history of the area. So not just the use of the land, but who was there and what were they doing at the time throughout the entire period of time. The third one is archaeological resources, cultural resources, and paleontological resources, if they exist or do not exist. Number 4 is climatology. So Appendix D4 in that third volume dictates what the climate has been like over the measurable period of time, whenever that happened to be. The fourth volume depicts in D5 the topography, the geology, the overburden materials that exist in the area, and define all of the rock characteristics and rock hydraulic characteristics in the area. Volume 5 defines the hydrology itself, how the water is working in those aquifers, in those units that have water in them. What is it doing? What's the water quality like? What can we expect throughout mine life and afterwards? The volume 6, which is the Appendix D7, is the resources, the soil resources that have been evaluated by our soil scientist, who is an expert in soils. Volume 7 is the vegetation inventory. That is our expert vegetation analyst, has covered all of the possible vegetation communities in the area of the permit application and outside of the permit application. Volume 8 is Appendix D9, which is the wildlife. Again, I said the Game and Fish did this section, or I should say commented on this section. Brook did the section. Game and Fish commented on it, critiqued it. Volume 9 is Appendix D10, which is the wetlands that the Army Corps of Engineers reviewed for us. 10th volume, Appendix D11, is on alluvial valley floors. The volume 11 and 12 are the mine plan and the reclamation plan. The appendices actually are the baseline data. All those different appendices in the different areas are the baseline data for the mine plan and reclamation plan. So everything is pointing towards the mine plan and reclamation plan.
You mentioned a number of appendices labeled D and then a number following it. Are there other appendices as well?
There are also appendices within the adjudication volume, A, B, C, and E. It's the D appendices that are pretty voluminous.
Yeah, I'll have you turn to page DEQ 1-050.
Okay.
Can you tell me what this page is?
This is a Form 1 that is a land quality division form to fill out the basic information of the individuals or individual that desires a coal mining permit. So all the different pieces of information as far as address, individuals that are responsible for things, different bits and pieces of information that relate directly to the mining are captured in this particular document. This document is almost twofold in a way. To begin the mining permit application with the document filled in on primarily the first page, and there are other aspects of this particular form that show up after the review process has taken place. And so the Form 1, when it is finally completed and accepted by Land Quality Division, is the unit that they utilize for the legal right to mine.
You can turn to page DEQ 1-053.
Okay?
What is the main purpose of this page?
This page is to add conditions on that may have shown up in our review of the mining application. These are items that may or may not be of a complex nature or a simple nature, depending on what it is, that needs to be ensured that it will be in this permit and that these activities will occur unquestionably. And this particular area here, then, we can put these very special conditions to point where we want the miners to work. Do we want you to be careful of alluvial valley floors? Do we want you to be careful of some of the overburden materials? What we'll do in these particular conditions is outline exactly how LQD wants to see it. It's enforceable, we enforce on it. And so therefore, whatever we have in here, conditions must be upheld and practiced by the company themselves.
And turn now to DEQ page 1066.
Okay?
Can you tell me what this part of the adjudication file is?
This is an estimate of the surface damage bond for Bighorn Coal Company's surface ownership area.
Who created that document?
The document was created by Western Water Consulting Engineering.
Who do they work for?
They are working for Brook Mine.
Has DEQ set a surface protection bond for Bighorn Coal Company's property yet?
We have not.
Will it do so?
We will.
When?
Upon all of the proceedings find that our original letter of technical adequacy was indeed correct and straightforward, and that the public review process had been continued until the time it needed to be continued. And everything right before the director decides to sign the permit in into law, or into use. At that point in time, the bond must be produced by Brook Mine prior to the issuance of the permit.
Thank you. Could you turn now to DEQ 1-102?
Okay?
And what is this section of the adjudication?
This is also a surface damage bond, mine surface damage bond for Padlock Ranch.
Who created that document?
Western Water Consultants.
Does DEQ need to require a surface protection bond for Padlock Ranch's lands?
We do not have to have a mine surface damage bond.
Why is that?
There is, to the best of our knowledge, a surface use agreement in place now between Brook Mine and the Padlock Ranch.
Have you turn now to DEQ 1-232?
I'm there.
Can you tell me what part of the adjudication file this is?
Yeah, this is Appendix A in the adjudication volume. It has things like the names and addresses of the surface and mineral rights holders, all the maps that are related to the surface and mineral rights holders as well. And also, if it existed, there would be oil and gas leases within the area. There are no oil and gas leases within the permit area, so they are not listed.
Are there any maps that reflect the information in Appendix A?
There are.
Where are those located in the permit application?
They are located in volume 1A. Excuse me. Which is called volume 2 in this particular set of volumes, so I don't have the official one.
I want to ask you to go to that just yet.
Okay.
Can you turn now to DEQ 1-264? Still in Exhibit 1, DEQ 1.
264, okay.
Can you please tell me what this part of the adjudication file is?
This is the names and addresses of, again, of surface rights and mineral rights within a half a mile of the permit boundary. The first one was within the permit boundary, and these are all those people within a half a mile of the permit boundary.
Is there a map that also reflects this information?
Yes, there is.
And where is that map located?
They would be in this volume right here.
What volume number is that?
That is volume 2 in this book.
Can you turn now to DEQ 1-372?
Okay.
And can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
These are actually water rights within 3 miles of the permit boundary, within 3 miles of the permit boundary.
All right, I'll have you turn now to DEQ 1-447.
Okay.
Can you tell me what this part of the permit or the adjudication volume is?
This is Appendix C in the adjudication volume, and this covers the legal description of lands itself within the permit application. the different survey plats that were utilized in determining these lands. Lands with sometimes within a different permit, as well as the permit application that Ron is trying to do, different memorandums of agreement between mineral owners and surface owners. By and large, the actual land itself and the relationships of that land to the individuals are entities that are directly responsible for it.
Are there maps associated with this information in volume 2?
There are.
All right, now have you turn to DEQ 1-465.
Okay.
And can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
This is the part of the application that outlines the different surface rights that the Brook Mine has been able to acquire for right to mine, consents for right to mine, and right of entry.
Can you turn to page DEQ 1-476?
Okay.
Can you tell me what this document is?
This is a typical, what we call the LQD Form 8. And the form has 2 primary goals. One is, of course, to list the lands involved in this landowner's consent. So that lists the landowner's direct lands that are going to be inside the permit boundary. And then it states, or the landowner states, that he has examined the mine plan and the reclamation plan and approves of them. And secondly, will give his or her consent to enter and inspect those lands by the LQD.
What landowner does this particular Form 8 relate to?
This one is for, this would actually be for Padlock. Mr. Hubert Patterson III, President and CEO of Padlock Ranch.
Can you turn now to DEQ 1-502? Can you tell me what this document is?
This one is I believe it's the order in lieu of consent that Brook Mine received from this council last year.
When was this document put into the permit application?
This was placed in the permit application on November 23rd, 2016.
Have you turn now to page DEQ 1-540?
Okay.
Can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
This is a legal description of the locations of buildings within and adjacent to within a half a mile of the permit area.
What's the purpose of this section of the permit application?
This is to categorize those pieces of infrastructure that exist prior to any mining in the permit area and very close to the permit area.
I'll have you turn now to DEQ 1-548.
Okay.
Can you tell me what this document is?
This is a list of the different permits and licenses that Brook will have to have from the various and sundry agencies to do their mining operation.
Does Brook Mine need to obtain all of these types of permits or approvals listed on this page?
They may, but only the ones that LQD issues are the ones that we can actually enforce.
So who would require the applicant to obtain these types of permits?
The different agencies, reporting agencies that these are associated with. For example, we have the Land Quality Division, of course, us. Then we go into Solid and Hazardous Waste Division, Water Quality, Air Quality. There's an MSHA license listing here. Also, the State Mine Inspector is listed. BATF is listed down there. And Water Quality Division at the bottom.
And if Brook, if the applicant obtained any of those permits, does the Land Quality Division enforce those?
No, we don't. We don't enforce all of those. Only the ones that say Land Quality Division.
All right. That's all the questions I have for DEQ Exhibit 1. Since we haven't done any stipulations at this point, I'd ask the council to admit DEQ Exhibit 1.
Are there any concerns?
No objection.
I'd also
Thank you. It's admitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also ask that DEQ Exhibit 34 be admitted.
Any objections?
No objection.
We'll admit DEQ Exhibit 34.
Thank you. I'll have you take a look now at Exhibit DEQ 2. Can you tell me what this document is? Oh, first, do you know what it is?
I am looking at it. This is the series of comments, critiques, responses to the permit application itself. And so these are all the documents that we generated in order to come up with the technical adequacy classification. These are the generated values.
Do those documents relate to particular comments from the permit process?
They do. They relate to specific comments. They relate to very specific comments.
Who created that document?
This document would be created by the actual authorship in a lot of the letters is generally between me and Mr. Jeff Barron of Western Water. But the documents are created by whole groups of individuals. The reviewers, when the first set of comments come back, the reviewers that did the original work get to look at those comments very obviously in the responses. And they may or may not have further comments based on how well the original ones were taken care of. And so what this represents is all the different individuals we talked about earlier, the experts, as well as the other ones that are involved in the permitting application process and their input during the permit application process.
I ask you to go ahead and take a look now at DEQ Exhibit 3.
Okay.
Do you know what this document is?
This is the second part of the adjudication volume that has the maps.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at a couple of those pages, and recognizing that they're folded up maps, as I have you pull them out and answer some questions. Please don't worry about trying to fold those back up entirely and put them away before I ask you to take a look at the next map.
Okay.
Can you please turn to page DEQ 3-008?
Okay.
Can you tell me what this document is?
This is a depiction of the surface rights, the different structures involved in and around the permit boundary, mortgages that may exist in there. There's some different leases, conventional leaseholders, as well as grazing leases. And so this is all the surface information necessary to determine who has what rights to this surface in this area.
You can go ahead and please open that up. council's benefit, I'll ask, can you tell me what the solid blue line indicates on that map?
The solid blue line is the Brook Mine approximate, or I should say, permit boundary that's being applied for in the permit application.
Can you please tell us what the dashed blue line indicates?
The dashed blue line is 1/2 a mile off of that permit boundary.
Are those markings common to other maps inside the adjudication file?
They're similar.
Go ahead and have you put that map aside for now. That will do.
Good, okay.
Thank you. Please turn to DEQ 3-011.
Okay.
Can you tell me what this document is?
Okay, these are lands that will be affected by mining or have been affected by mining in the past. And the showing the area of disturbance of the historical mining, both underground as well as surface. And areas within 1/2 mile of the permit boundary that have also been historically been mined, either underground or surface.
There are a number of colored areas on this map. Can you describe what the different colored areas represent?
The brown areas that look like a, in some cases, a linear feature along with little sidebar features are underground mines, reflecting both the area of the underground mining as well as sometimes of the gateways and some of the other aspects of underground mining. The blue on the upper right-hand corner and top of the map are surface mine. They were mined previously by surface mining operations. And the hatched area, the purple hatched area, is the area that Bighorn Coal has right now under their permit. Permit.
I believe there's an area colored in green. Can you tell us what that?
That green is a mine. It's a small mining permit held by Taylor Quarry, where they mine scoria and sell the red rock for ballast and roads and everything else that they use it for.
Is that inside the Brook Mine permit area?
It is inside the Brook Mine permit area.
Is the Bighorn Coal Company permit area inside the Brook Mine permit area?
It is in places inside the Brook Mine permit area.
There's also an area, I believe, bordered in orange. Can you tell us what that area indicates?
This area is a pit. It's also a scoria pit, maintained and run by Tongue River Stone. It is an active scoria pit at present, and fairly small, fairly quiet operation, but it does exist.
Does the Tongue River Stone scoria pit fall inside the Brook Mine permit area?
It does not.
I ask you now to turn to DEQ 3-012. And I won't ask you to open up this map.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Are you familiar with all of the maps in the
I am, yes.
permit application?
I am.
Can you tell us what this document is?
This is the, all the water rights that occur within the permit application boundary, as well as a half a mile outside of the permit application boundary.
You turn to page DEQ 3-014.
Okay?
And without opening that, can you tell me what that document is?
This is the depiction of all the surface water rights inside the proposed permit boundary, as well as water rights within 3 miles of the outside of the permit boundary.
And is there a particular type of water rights shown on that map?
I would have to open it to find out.
Okay, go ahead and do that then.
The primary type of water right generally is a permit held by the state engineer's office. All the water in the state of Wyoming is owned by the state of Wyoming, and in order to utilize that water, you've got to file a permit for use of the water, estimating how much you're going to use, how much water is available, what the water quality is like in some cases, not all.
Does this map show surface or groundwater rights?
In this case, this is surface water rights.
Is there another map that shows the groundwater rights near the permit area?
That is the next map.
Okay.
Almost got it.
And turning to page DEQ DEQ 3-015, can you tell me what that document is?
This is the groundwater rights inside and within 3 miles of the permit boundary itself.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I think we could have a short break. We have made faster time than I thought we might, unless the council is planning to recess here soon. We're coming up at 5 o'clock.
Well, we won't be recessing for the day yet, but we can take a 5-minute break at this time. So.
We'll ask that exhibit 2 and 3 be admitted.
Any objections?
No objection.
Exhibits DEQ 2 and 3 are admitted.
Thank you.
So now we'll take a 5-minute break. Oh, that would take. What? We gotta be done by 7. So we gotta go out and party. Is that what you said? You had a party at 7?
No, dinner.
We have the.
Right now? Was that DEQ 1?
Yeah, the agenda should be.
I don't know which page it is.
Ready here? So for those who are looking at their watches and wondering if we'll ever get to eat or anything like that, we're going to go, it's about 5:13. We'll go to no later than 6:15 tonight, and then we will take a recess till morning. Tomorrow morning, we will start right at 9 a.m. So if you need to get things set up, make sure you get here before that, and that's why we're starting at 9, so there's time to get all this technology back up, everything in place. And so we'll go for about another hour here. So please, Mr. Coleman, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the benefit of the council and for the parties, we are intending to go through the remaining exhibits for the permit application. We may also, depending upon how far we can get, talk about exhibit DEQ 15 and DEQ 16. So it'd be exhibits DEQ 1 through 13 and then 15 and 16, just in case anyone has objections on those. And I also, guess just to make a kind of short work of it, DEQ exhibits 1 through, or I guess the remaining ones, 4 through 13, are volumes of the permit application. I might ask to just admit those now if there are no objections, and if not, we can go through and establish more about them.
Any objections to admitting those exhibits?
No objection.
We'll admit the DEQ exhibits 4 through 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, Mr. Christensen, can you please take a look at DEQ exhibit 4?
I have it.
All right, can you please turn to DEQ 4-005?
I'm at it.
Can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
This part of the permit application is Appendix D1, one of the many appendices that fall beneath the D appendix classification, and it is an appendix about land use.
What's the purpose of this appendix?
To determine what different uses exist for the land as it existed, as it exists today, and as it should exist in the future.
What kinds of uses does this appendix discuss?
This discusses past land uses, for example, it's grazing land. In some cases, there's industrial, commercial developed in some areas. Actually, was more in the past than there is now. It's also recreational land in some of these areas. Some of it's residential land where the landowners live. So the land use covers quite a broad range of uses.
And I apologize, I believe you mentioned both past and current uses.
Yes.
Turning now to page 4-043. Can you tell me what this part of the permit application?
Not quite there yet.
Sorry.
There we go.
4-043.
Yes. Appendix D2, history.
What's the purpose of this appendix?
It outlines the history of the area, all of the history that can be gleaned from historical records, anecdotal information, any place, old publications, any place you can find history of the area. They have put together to paint a picture of the history of this particular part of Sheridan County.
Compared to other permit applications you've reviewed, how thorough is this appendix?
This is a very thorough appendix. In a lot of cases, history is, there's a lot of assumption based on agricultural land and agricultural uses, particularly out in the middle of the Powder River Basin where the mines are very, very large. And there are vast swaths of agricultural land, pasture land that's been used for pasture for generations. The history of this area has had a little bit more activity taking place. And so some of these pieces of information that are recorded here are of materials that I didn't even know about in some cases.
Can you turn now to page 4-066? you get there, can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
This is Appendix D3, Cultural and Paleontological Resources.
Is there anything unique about the Brook Mine permit application as it relates to Appendix D3 compared to other applications you've reviewed?
In this case, since it's all private property and private coal rights, there are no cultural and paleontological surveys that have been performed.
Are cultural and paleontological surveys required when there is private surface land, private mineral owners?
They are not required when there is private surface and private mineral owners.
Did DEQ request comments from the State Historic Preservation Office?
We did.
When did that occur?
That would have been in November 2014, late November 2014.
And what was provided to the State Historic Preservation Office?
We gave them a letter that defined our reason for contacting them and where they could find the information that we were referring to. That could be found either our Sheridan or Cheyenne office, and gave them the opportunity to go to those offices to look at the permit application, should they decide to do so. And the Cheyenne location was we felt was a good match because SHPO's there in Cheyenne as well. So,
what was their response to the request?
We didn't have a response. Well, we did have a response. It was, this is private surface and private mineral. We don't have any response or comments.
Okay. Does the permit application in other places address what would happen if historic or archaeological resources are found during the mining operations?
Yes, it does. It's in the mine plan.
Okay. And what are the commitments related to locating historic or archaeological resources during the mining?
In a nutshell, if any artifacts or objects are discovered that would indicate cultural or paleontological resources, the mining would stop in that area. The area will be essentially blocked off so no one can get in there and do something to that particular area, such as illegal collecting. And experts would be called in to do a paleontological or archaeological clearance survey in that area.
Have you turn now to DEQ 4-077.
There.
Okay. Can you tell me what this part of the permit application is?
This is Appendix D4, climatology. It covers the climatological overview of this part of Sheridan County, temperature, wind, evaporation, humidity, all the different aspects of climate and climatology that are involved in that science or in this particular volume. It also has historic climatological information from wind, temperatures, rainfall, also recorded in here.
Thank you. I'll have you close up that volume. And if you can please turn to Exhibit DEQ 5. All right. Can you tell us what this exhibit is?
This is Appendix D5, Geology and Overburden.
What's the purpose of the Appendix D5?
D5 is to define all the geologic units that I talked about earlier to a very great degree so that we can anticipate what kind of mining practices may have to take place in these areas. They may depict rock units that we have to pay special close attention to because they may be soft rocks in an area that we may have to have harder rock formations. They are bits and pieces of the topography, for example. In those rock units above the coal, there can be constituents in there, quality-wise constituents, that are unacceptable to be spoiled, for example, into a groundwater zone. And so those parts of overburden would have to be special handled by the mining. They would have to come in and move the dirt specially to place it above the water table so that when that material goes into the hole again, it stays above the water table and below the root zone. There are special places to put that material, and so the geology and overburden assessment will help define where they have to go. Many of the mines I worked at did this on a continual basis.
Who reviewed Appendix D5?
I did.
Can you briefly describe the coal seams, or which coal seams Brook Mine is proposing to mine?
Brook Mine is proposing to mine the Monarch coal bed, the Kearney coal bed, and the Masters coal bed.
Which of those coal seams will be mined with the high wall mining technique?
That would be both the Kearney and the Masters beds.
Does Appendix D5 include information about those coal beds?
It does.
Can you describe what the overburden is above the coal beds?
What the nature of the overburden is?
Correct.
The overburden consists primarily of silts and shales in sandstone, interbedded silts, shales, and sandstone. And these units above the coal are the units that we have to be concerned with, whether or not their quality is suitable enough to be placed back in the backfill. But by and large, these are deposits that be deposited in a coal swamp during periods of high velocity water. So you get the very long, quiet periods of coal deposition taking place over thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. And the big warm mountains start getting back up into the air again, kicking their way up, and all the material comes down off the mountains and washes out across this big coal swamp and forms those burden units above the coal.
Okay. Are there any geologic hazards inside the permit area?
There are several geologic hazards within the area, defined geologic hazards.
What would you define geologic hazards?
Faulting, there's some faulting that takes place within the mine. There are always geologic hazards of a high wall when you're mining any kind of open pit mine. There are also potential hazards in locating to pinch out areas. For example, if you have a coal that may be pinching out into a sandstone very quickly, as happens in the eastern part of the Powder River Basin, your high wall conditions, you have to pay close attention to those because the high wall starts getting unstable in those areas. None of those have been identified at Brook Mine as they have back in the other part of the basin. But those are the kinds of geologic materials that we keep our eyes particularly stringently looking and carrying forward, information forward.
Does Appendix D5 characterize geologic hazards inside the permit area?
It does.
If there are geologic hazards in the permit area, does that mean mining can't occur?
No, it does not.
How does DEQ handle regulating mining when there are geologic hazards present?
First, the hazards are identified, exactly what kind of hazards they are and the nature of the hazards. Determine what kind of risk exists from these different hazards. For example, the faults in this particular mine are not very big. They're fairly small faults. We don't expect a lot of movement along those fault planes. We begin to move the overburden right next to them. We see these up in Montana, southern Montana as well. The same kind of faulting systems show up in the Decker mine up there as well as the Spring Creek mine. The mining hazards that we see, the geologic hazards, after they're all listed, we established a methodology for dealing with them, depending upon what needs to be done by the mining engineers. They will design the cuts, they will design the trenches, and they will design everything else within the mine so it fits within those geologic hazards, and they are accounted for, so they're not surprises later on down the road.
How did the applicant obtain the information included in Appendix D6?
That came from all the drill holes that they did in 2012, 13, 14. During that period, they were drilling on the coal notification.
Did they consult with DEQ in picking the locations of the drill holes?
They did.
When did they do that?
They did that starting in 2013 and 2014 when they were doing overburden sampling, and they needed to know approximately where the holes needed to be for the overburden sampling. We require holes initially to be in 160 acre spacing. Brook was putting them on 80 acre spacings. And so we were selecting those locations for those particular holes off of the original drilling they did.
Was there more drilling than for the Brook mine than would be required in the regulations?
There was, in this particular case. The overburden sampling was in a tighter configuration than we're normally used to.
Was there any testing of those samples?
They were tested.
What kinds of things were tested for?
Oh, the coal, for example, would be tested for all its burning characteristics, obviously. A lot of the overburden materials were tested for nature of the material, what the clay density was, what the sand density was, and some of these others that determine how heavy the overburden is going to be were characterized by geotechnical engineering. There were also some small amounts of tests performed on the immediate roof of the coal material itself, and the floor of the coal, so that they could determine what might be the characteristics of the high wall mining that's taking place.
Is DEQ satisfied by the amount of drilling and testing conducted for making Appendix D5?
There were a couple of areas they could not access due to limitations, and so we worked out a consideration that they are going to gather those overburden samples prior to any mining activity taking place or any disturbance taking place, the condition of permit.
Does the lack of the mining samples from those locations Brook Mine was not able to access prior to the application, does the lack of having those in the permit application make the application deficient?
No, it does not, primarily because of the spacing of the original holes. They were close enough together that we could extrapolate from a lot of those holes into the areas. We need holes there, but there's enough data we can extrapolate into that area for now.
So does the application accurately characterize the geology inside and around the permit area?
It does.
I'll have you take a look now at Exhibit D6. It's in the next box. It's another volume.
Of course, it's on the bottom. I forgot to tell you that one of our reviewers' name is Murphy. Okay.
He's not a legal expert, correct?
No.
All right. If you take a look at Exhibit D6, or sorry, Exhibit DEQ6, can you tell us what this document is?
This is the hydrology appendix that covers the hydrologic characteristics of the surface water and groundwater regimes.
Okay. What kinds of information does Appendix D6 contain?
For example, the surface water will contain the amount of surface water found in any of the areas under study, how regional it is, how dependent upon weather it is, what the characteristics of the water are like, both the amount of water and the quality of the water, particularly, is very important. Water quality in the state of Wyoming is something that's particularly precious to us, and so a lot of this has to be calculated and determined. Groundwater is the same. We determine how much water is down under the ground. Are there any aquifers down there that will produce water of usable amounts that can be used for domestic purposes? Or the problem with the groundwater in this part of Wyoming and in and around the coal mines is the coal beds are the aquifers. And above and below those coal beds, there really are no really good aquifers. And so by and large, sometimes it's difficult to locate water in some of those sand units. These are very dry units on this side of the basin, unlike the other side. So these are the kind of studies that are performed to determine what those characteristics are like.
Who at DEQ reviewed the information in Appendix D6?
I reviewed it. Dr. Muthu Kuchner reviewed it. Mr. Matt Coons reviewed it.
What parts of Appendix D6 did you review?
I read more of the regional information, regional description, drainage basin description, some of the other large-scale narrative that was involved there, and then very much the specifics and a lot of the modeling we left with Dr. Kuchnar and Mr. Coons.
Did you review the hydrogeology information inside Appendix D6?
I did.
Okay. I think you explained a little bit about the hydrogeology inside the permit area, correct?
Correct.
Is there anything else you'd want to add in your explanation to the council?
The area, the mining area is particularly interesting. The area on the eastern side of the mine has quite a bit of water in the coal. it's just always been that way. Whenever we were when I worked for Bighorn Coal, and we were in those pits, that water was just a part of life. As you move to the west, and fairly quickly move to the west, you get up out of that bathtub and get a little bit higher up in the rock units, and the water goes away, both the overburden and the coal. There are some of those water wells that they had to have special practices put into place to even get water samples. Because it's so dry, by and large, when the drill rig works on it, and they blow on that hole, all you get is mist. There isn't any water being made in it. So the characteristics of the water change, the hydrology changed across the mine fairly quickly. From the little bathtub that sits down there where TR1 is at, very quickly up towards those hills where TR2 and 3 and 4 and the rest of them are at. So we get up out of the water fairly quickly within the first 2 years of mine life.
Does the permit application, or does the information in D6 address that description you had of the differences in hydrogeology between different parts of the permit?
It does.
How did they collect that? How did the applicant collect that information?
A lot of the information was collected from the water wells that were put into place, the monitor wells that were put into place to observe the characteristics. They didn't just put monitor wells in the coal. They attempted to put monitor wells in the overburden as well to see if they could get any water out of some of those sandstone units to monitor, if nothing else. And by and large, that was not successful in those cases.
Does Appendix D6 contain the results of that monitoring?
It would, yes.
Did the applicant consult with DEQ prior to selecting the locations of the monitoring sites?
It did.
And when did that occur?
And that was approximately 2/3 of the way through the CN period, when the water wells were beginning to be put in. Initially, there were a lot of drill holes put in place to see what was down there. And then they began to select places to put water wells in so they were best suited to monitor a fairly large area. Because the initial wells were pretty critical as to where they put those. And so we determined spacing, nature of the material we're going to put it into, based on some of the geologic logs. And we went over this with Western Water and ourselves and determined where some of the best characteristics were to try to measure hydrology of the units.
Did DEQ approve the locations of the monitoring wells?
We did. There were locations that were preliminarily located on the map. And by and large, they stuck pretty close to the map.
Did DEQ also approve locations of surface water monitoring?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And did DEQ make those approvals prior to Brook collecting that information?
We discussed the locations for the surface water sampling sites and agreed those were adequate locations that should provide information for the bulk of the drainage in that particular part of the mine permit.
Okay, those are all my questions on that exhibit. Okay. I'll ask you to take a look now at DEQ Exhibit 7.
And I have it.
All right. Can you tell us what this document is?
This is a appendix that addresses soil resources in and around the permit application area.
Is that Appendix D7?
It is.
Can you tell us some of the information in Appendix D7 that's relevant to the objections that have been filed?
Would you please rephrase that?
Can you tell us some information that can be found, types of information that can be found in Appendix D7 that are relevant to some of the objections that have been filed against the permit application?
In a lot of cases, we can utilize the soil analysis to determine what its suitability is for reclamation. And there has been some concern about reclamation in most mines for good reason. We don't have a lot of topsoil in this state. And so we've got to deal with everything we can possibly salvage. And so we have characterized these soils pretty closely. We're pretty concerned about the nature of the soil we have and what we can do with it. And so special adherence is placed to these kinds of studies. We are ensuring that we can reclaim the surface to at least its pre-mining condition, if not a better post-mining condition. And that's essentially why we're really go all out and getting these samples and doing these analyses on these individual soils. So we can match the soil, the post-mine land use, and the location it's going to be in.
What types of soils are analyzed in Appendix D7?
Generally, with these different loamy soils that are analyzed, you also get some kinds of, they define them as soils by the outcrop, but it's actually a definition of no soil. There are also types of loams out there that are conducive to certain kinds of vegetation. Certain soil units are better for other kinds of vegetation than some other ones are. And so what they've done by this is they've mapped these units to also understand where they may want to put their vegetation species in after the mining has occurred and reclamation starts to occur.
Does Appendix D7 have information about topsoil?
It does.
And was that some of the soils you were discussing?
Those are the topsoils, yes.
Does it also have information about overburden?
It does not.
Where is that information at?
That is in D5.
Okay.
Geology.
All right. Have you, go ahead and close up that volume. Have you take a look at EQ Exhibit 8.
Okay.
And can you tell us what this is? What this document is?
This is the appendix that is related to vegetation.
Okay. And just for the council's benefit and viewing the record later, are there any objections related to vegetation?
I didn't see any.
Okay.
No, I didn't see any based on vegetation.
We'll move along then. I'll have you think maybe in the next box, but appendix or DEQ Exhibit 9.
I have Exhibit 9.
Okay. Can you tell us what this exhibit is?
This is the wildlife exhibit.
What kind?
And it is the exhibit that we send to both the Wyoming Game and Fish and the Fish and Wildlife Service.
What kind of information does this exhibit include?
There's information and data collection on, for example, sage grouse. See if the sage grouse are anywhere in this area, and raptors, eagles, bald eagles, if possible, golden eagles. There are migration patterns possibly through this area, deer, antelope. I saw an elk out there once. That was only one time. So they generally take this information about all the different wildlife species. And this also includes rabbits and ground squirrels and all the wildlife that lives out there, every species that exists out there, and categorizes it and places it in this format.
You mentioned sage grouse. What does the application say about sage grouse?
This is outside of a sage grouse core area, and there is one lek within 2 miles of the proposed permit application, northwest side of the permit application.
How does the permit application address that lek?
It addresses the fact that they will be monitoring the lek, and that if any observed changes are taking place, they will attempt to determine why they are taking place. There could be predation taking place. There could be, sometimes it's just they abandon leks for whatever reason, and sometimes they move to new ones. So it could be a lot of reasons.
Is that monitoring more than what the regulations would require?
No, it's what the regulations require.
Were there any restrictions placed on the permit based upon the presence of sage grouse in the area?
There were not.
Does the application discuss endangered or threatened species?
It does.
What does the application, what does Appendix D9 say about endangered species?
And what it says essentially is that any threatened or endangered species would be monitored if they occur within the mine permit or close to mine permit area. They didn't find any threatened or endangered species in the area. And so at this point in time, it's a commitment within the permit to take action if such species exists or shows up.
You mentioned that the Wyoming Department of Game and Fish had reviewed this appendix, correct?
Right.
Did they provide comments back to Brook about this appendix?
They provided some suggestions, and one of those was to be mindful of the sage grouse lek that was in that area, to be mindful of the sage grouse. Different studies that are taking place in the state, and to be very careful they don't intrude in one that it wasn't known about. That's, and golden eagle nests, they were saying, please observe the locations of golden eagle nests. There are nesting areas close to the mine area, in the cliffs and in the high country around there.
Did the applicant incorporate into the application Game and Fish's suggestions?
They did.
And similarly for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they also reviewed this appendix, correct? Did they have comments that they provided to the applicant?
Very similar comments to Game and Fish. Primarily, be careful if they're, monitor for T&E species, and if they exist, then create a mitigation plan. But by and large, it was just a suggestion to be mindful of the wildlife and to observe and what was taking place. And this, of course, is done through the annual report every year. Wildlife is monitored every year, and the report on that shows up in the annual report.
Did the applicant incorporate into the application all of the Fish and Wildlife Service's suggestions?
The suggestions were so similar to Game and Fish that they would have been incorporated regardless.
So there were no outstanding comments on this?
No, there were not. No, there were no comments to be responded to in any of their correspondence.
Okay, I'll have you take a look at DEQ Exhibit 10. And can you tell us what this document is?
These are the wetland inventories of the area, which is Appendix D10. And we had some assistance from the Army Corps of Engineers. For all intents and purposes, they stated that this area was, the work that had been done was sufficient. This area is not a concern.
Okay. Moving right along, I'll have you take a look at Exhibit DEQ 11. All right, can you tell us what this document is?
This is the document on alluvial valley floors.
Okay. Can you describe what alluvial valley floors are?
Alluvial valley floor is kind of a catch-all phrase for drainages that have the ability to be farmed for all intents and purposes. AVFs are determined by a lot of different characteristics, by the nature of the material in the soils, the kind of material that the alluvium, the dirt essentially is deposited by the water body, what the characteristics are like, is the area under sub-irrigation, because of the water that may be in the material. Does the area support farming? Are there crops being grown along the drainage, within the drainage area? There are a lot of different numbers or items to check off as you're going through these alluvial valley floors. There are different kinds of alluvial valley floors. And so depending upon what we have in our rules and regulations and how they define specific kinds of AVFs, we can utilize those then to generate information on potential AVFs in the area.
Who reviewed Appendix D11?
I did.
Are alluvial valley floors addressed in DEQ's regulations?
They are.
Is a surface coal mining operation allowed to disturb alluvial valley floors?
They are.
What protections are required for alluvial valley floors?
Depending upon whether you're going to disturb them or not. If you're going to disturb them, they have to be, the channel has to be rebuilt, rechannelized off away from wherever the disturbance is going to be so that the water can continue to flow. down to the downstream rights holders. And so they generally will offset some distance and put a channel in place for that water to be moving through prior to and during the mining process. Once it's been reclaimed, they reclaim it as an alluvial valley floor, and so they very specifically place those kinds of materials as almost a false alluvium, and they rebuild that material where they're going to put the creek bottom back. And so they essentially rebuild it. The most successful one is, of course, the Belfouche River that Cordero Mining mined through and restored and reclaimed to its pre-mining use.
Does DEQ have experience with enforcing reclamation of alluvial valley floors?
We do, very much so.
You mentioned the Belfouche River. Are you familiar with any other instances where alluvial valley floors were disturbed?
Rawhide Creek in the eastern part of the basin. There were also some Cordero Creek, Caballos Creek, and a couple of the other ones that come to mind. No ADFs on this side of the basin that I know of. So all the ones I can remember are over on the eastern side of the Powder River Basin.
All right. What information does Appendix D11 include about ADFs near the permit area?
Would you please clarify that?
Generally, what kinds of information does Appendix D11 include regarding alluvial valley floors near the permit area?
A narrative on alluvial valley floors, several assessments of potential alluvial valley floors in the area that I underwent some testing for a couple of years during the permit application process and trying to determine where ADS may be that exist within the mine permit area and where ADS might exist outside the mine permit area. I did define and locate one within the mine permit area and studied it and characterized it and built a narrative on it and put it into a narrative format document.
Is there a map in Appendix D11 that identifies potential alluvial valley floors?
There is a map in there that does.
I'm going to ask you to turn to that map. Did DEQ 11-031?
Which one?
Page DEQ 11-031. I think you might have gone past it.
I have an 11.3-1. The superficial geology?
Looking for a map labeled Exhibit D11-1-1.
Oh. And then it's potentially sub-irrigated lands.
Okay. All right, I'll ask you to go ahead and open up that.
Sorry, Joe. Sorry.
I'm asking you to open this one because I think it might be useful as we go through the different areas that you considered. Can you tell us what the different shaded areas on the map represent?
These primary shaded areas, first of all, the red coloration on that, this is an aerial photograph, but taken with color infrared photography rather than conventional photography. And all the red or pink areas on there are vegetation. And so the drainages stand out readily. That's why this kind of photography is utilized for this purpose. Drainages really show up in this wherever vegetation is growing. And there are different stippled patterns on this particular map. Over on the eastern side of the map, the right-hand side of the map, in and around the Bighorn coal mine area, there is a declared as an AVF during the Bighorn coal mine life. That was declared all the way over to where the clean burn pits are at, the clean burn recreational area. So that area in there with the the diagonal lines is declared AVF. The other areas from that point on, as you follow that in the southern part of the mine permit area to the west, over to the left, is an area that has been defined as potentially sub-irrigated land and land that could possibly be an AVF, depending upon the constituents and the nature of the materials.
I'll ask you first about the area you mentioned has already been confirmed as an AVF.
Okay.
Does that remain declared an AVF for the purposes of the Brook Mine application?
Once a declaration has been made, it remains in place.
Okay. Does the permit application identify that area as an AVF?
It does.
You mentioned that you had identified an area as an AVF or alluvial valley floor that was inside the permit area for the purposes of reviewing the Brook application.
Right.
Can you tell us what that area was?
That area was in the upper left-hand corner where this, it's called Slater Creek, comes from the northwest to the southeast and crosses over into the mine in the, across the blue line there. And there was an area right as it crosses the permit boundary in there. And there's a fence out there. Right as it crosses there, there's a bit of a alluvial valley floor that then tapers out fairly quickly in that area because historically someone had built a stock dam there and modified the creek bottom by moving dirt, building a stock dam that was then breached subsequent to the SEO saying you've got to permit all these ponds. And so typical, there are a lot of ponds out here that got breached when they had to permit those because they didn't want to permit the ponds. So there is a pond up in there, or an original stock pond that was breached and has affected the property from that part of the alluvial material all the way downstream for quite a ways.
I'm going to hand you another binder here.
Cool.
And ask you to turn to, I've opened it up to Exhibit DEQ 15. Go ahead and keep that out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Trying to be careful of the microphone.
Yeah.
Do you know what this document is?
Yes, this document. Move this over. Contains the AVF determination that I made on Slater Creek and published February 10th, 2016.
And this was the AVF area you were just talking about?
It is.
Okay. When did you determine that area was an AVF?
On February 10th. Once I did a field walk or a field search on that as we walked up and down Slater Creek from the permit boundary all the way down to the interstate and back and analyzed the material. A lot of places this is a very incised stream. It's 6 feet deep and 3 feet wide. And so we were able to determine the nature of the alluvial materials in these areas. And so I classified the type of material that was the alluvium, the amount of water that was available to the system, whether it was being farmed or not, and finally came up with my determination of an AVF, Class X AVF.
Does the permit application identify the Slater Creek AVFs you just discussed?
Say that again?
Does the permit application include a description of the AVFs that you've just
It
discussed?
does not.
Okay. Why is that?
The permit application was technically complete for AVF studies prior to my publishing of the AVF determination. So at the time that the technical completeness was determined for AVFs, I had not yet published the AVF material and there was nothing for them to put in the application. Once it was declared complete, then we don't revisit that again.
Was Brook required to identify and have DEQ declare this area an AVF in order for its permit application to be technically adequate?
Yes.
Does Brook Mine propose to conduct any mining through this AVF?
No.
Is this AVF going to be affected through the mining operations?
It is not planned to be affected in any way.
Does DEQ need to identify alluvial valley floors if they're not going to be affected by the mine operation?
No, we do not.
Is that a regulatory requirement?
It is. It's a regulatory. The language in the regulation essentially says that if the ADF is not going to be affected by mining, it does not have to be classified at that time.
So what was the purpose of identifying the Slater Creek AVFs if they weren't going to be affected by mining?
Because it was inside the permit boundary. And I felt it was important to get that one classified.
Okay, were there any other areas inside the permit area,
Okay.
that DEQ considered whether or not they may be an alluvial valley floor?
The Hidden Water Creek area on the north side of the permit was also considered for AVF consideration.
And what was the conclusion of that consideration?
That the Hidden Water Creek is an ephemeral drainage that has never been farmed. It does not have any characteristics of an alluvial valley floor, and therefore we determined it was simply an ephemeral drainage that flows water from sudden spring storms or runoff after the snow melts. And the only time water is in that particular drainage. In fact, that drainage doesn't usually flow for maybe years at a time sometimes.
So does an alluvial valley floor have to have a sufficient water flow in order to be characterized as an alluvial valley
It
floor?
does. It has to have water available, either through direct watering or at least irrigation.
And moving to one final area of possible alluvial valley floors. You had mentioned when you were describing the map on the Exhibit D, or the map with the, I guess you described it, the vegetation photography,
Okay.
the infrared. You mentioned there was an area that went from along the Tongue River, from what had been already determined as an alluvial valley floor for the Bighorn coal permit, and then moving west along the south side of the Brook permit application. Has DEQ considered whether those lands may be alluvial valley floors?
We have considered that.
Are those areas going to be affected by the mining under the permit application?
They are not.
Has DEQ made a declaration of whether or not those lands are alluvial valley floors?
We have not.
Does it need to if those properties are not going to be affected by the mining operations?
Since they're not going to be affected, they do not yet at this time need to be declared AVF.
Okay. I'll have you take a look at Exhibit DEQ 16. It's another tab inside the binder you have open to D15. Okay.
There we go.
Do you recognize this document?
This is one I created on potential AVFs.
Does this address that area we were just discussing of the Tongue River, areas along the Tongue River south of the permit area?
It does. It shows both the Bighorn AVF acreage as well as the potential Tongue River AVF acreage all the way towards the western side of the permit boundary.
And does that include the conclusions we just talked about the land being affected by mining?
Yes, it does.
Are those lands otherwise included in the permit application?
They are only included as ancillary to the permit application if they fall within the half-mile radius that some things occur with and the 3-mile radius. And as they are incidental to the permit boundary, they show up.
But do they need to be declared an alluvial valley floor in order to make the permit application technically adequate?
They do not if no effect is going to take place. One of the things we'll have in that permit will be a condition that if at any point in time they're going to affect an AVF in any way, shape, or form, we will halt mining in that direction if necessary and do a full AVF evaluation study prior to any kind of disturbance taking place there. So one of the conditions of mining will be to protect AVFs that are adjacent to the property.
All right, thank you. You can close up that exhibit. now ask you to open up DEQ Exhibit 12, and it may be in the final box. Yeah.
It looks like a final box.
I'm hoping it's not on the bottom of the box.
It's actually
On the bottom of the box.
All right.
So you now have DEQ Exhibit 12 pulled up?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us what this document is?
This document is the mine plan. This is the document that we will utilize to enforce mining within that permit boundary and enforce all the aspects of the law at our disposal.
Does the mine plan identify information about the method of mining?
It does.
Can you describe a little bit more information about the high wall mining technique?
This is similar to auger mining. That was something that took place 20 and 25 years ago. A couple of the mines I worked at had considered doing it, but decided not to because auger mining is very difficult to keep the hole going straight. And as you're augering down into that coal from the high wall, that hole can take off in different directions, primarily based on the nature of the coal, how fractured is it, how soft or hard is it, and they wander away and have a tendency to cross each other. And when they cross each other like that, they start building voids down there, they start building rooms, and then you get subsidence. This process is totally different than that particular process, other than they come in from the high wall. Once the coal has been mined out of that trench, they'll set the high wall miner up on one end of the pit. They have these series of 40-foot rails that come in that have conveyor on them. Right in front of it, there's a continuous miner head that will mine approximately 12 foot wide and 11 feet high and go down into the coal bed, 2,000 feet, with every 40 feet being a new conveyor attached to it and then move down into it again. And these are directionally intelligent. They know where they're at in the particular mining sequence. They know where they're at in the coal. They know where they're at, latitude, longitude, and everything else. There are sensors in place on these mining heads that will move it depending on what the nature of the material is. They're looking for coal at all times. And you can determine that with a special gamma probe. And they are advertised, at least, to be accurate to 4 inches and 1,000 feet. And so we get away from a lot of those interference that you used to get with the auger mining, where they used to intersect each other. These do not intersect each other. These obey the mine plan, for example, and the mining potential that's there, and builds a system that is as close to non-subsiding as possible, and yet can be accessed from the high wall safely. And so, by and large, this new technology has made this possible, so it's safe and effective and non-subsiding.
Is high wall mining an improvement on auger mining?
Significant improvement on auger mining. Very similar from the surface aspect of it, still sitting in the bottom of a trench, going into a high wall, but that's about the only similarity.
Do both techniques leave ribs between the holes that they dig?
There are a series of pillars or webs or whatever you want to call them between the shafts that are dug by the continuous miner. So it may be 12 feet wide shaft and 12 foot wide web, and 12 foot wide shaft and 12 foot wide web. So there are just intervening pillars.
So did DEQ apply the regulations for auger mining to high wall mining
We
technique?
did.
Through high wall mining, is there anyone who goes underground?
No, not one time. And I'm sure Imshal would have a lot to say about it.
Does high wall mining remove all of the coal in the mined coal seam?
It does not.
Does the application identify what percentage of the coal in the mined coal seams that Brook Mining is expecting to be able to recover?
It does.
Do you know what that number is?
The number average is 50% recovery, and it varies from place to place depending upon the nature of the material that they'll be moving into, the nature of the roof rock and floor.
What does the coal that's left unmined do after mining is over?
It serves to buttress the webs that they put in there, and essentially works as a placeholder, or I should say as a holder for the overburden to not subside in those particular concavities in there and those openings. The idea here is maybe you'll come back sometime in the future and get that coal with some other technology that doesn't exist right now. Considering how things have changed in the last 20 years, it's probably realistic.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to turn to page DEQ 12028.
Okay,
Okay.
I have it.
Okay. Can you describe generally or I guess what does this section discuss?
This particular section discusses the mining methodology, the scheduling of the mining tools and equipment, and the assessments that are made during the mining process.
Does that address the mining sequence?
It does.
Can you describe generally the mining sequence for the Brook mine?
I'm not quite sure if you want where the cuts will be or the nature of the sequential excavations. Where they're going to be or what they are.
Can you describe the geographic sequence of the mining?
I can't. At present, geographically, they were planning on starting in what they call TR1, trench TR1, immediately south of the Bighorn Coal shop and warehouse facility. And that particular mine trench was to be opened up through an old mining area, pit 1, that Bighorn Coal had. And they would establish not only coal out of that area and the mine out of that area, but establish a long-term sump. Because like I said, that is in the bottom of the bathtub. And what they need to do is, in order to have water for their mining and continue water throughout the mining life, they've got to have a place to get it. Since the water is so deficient farther to the west, they're going to put a sump in at TR1 and use that for the mine water. Again, moving to the west then, to that point, and very gradually place trenches, remove the overburden sequence, put it off to the side, remove the coal and the cut, do high wall mining, back out of the trench, put overburden back in the hole again, and put topsoil on top of it. And they'll do that moving east to west, trench after trench after trench, until they get all the way to the western side of the permit boundary. Okay. Take about 13 years.
Have you turned to DEQ page 12-129? It's going to be a map.
Oh, there it is.
Can you please tell us what this document is?
Okay, this shows the sequence of disturbance that's going to happen on the surface. Obviously, being a high wall mine, there will be superficial disturbance in and around the trench areas and other areas that they'll need to utilize overburden materials at. And so this shows the sequence under which that material will be moved, where it will be placed, and the approximate scheduling of that.
Okay. How does the map indicate where the trenches are located?
It does.
Okay, and how does it indicate those?
They have a number TR-1, TR-2, TR-3, those are the trenches.
Okay. What are the other shaded areas on the map? What do those describe?
Those are the total disturbances that will take place in a lot of areas. They can disturb up to the permit boundary. And so we're estimating in this first year that there'll be quite a bit of disturbance, probably a topsoil condition. We want to ensure that they recover enough topsoil in this particular area to take care of the lands that are there at this time.
Are there any areas that are indicated to not be disturbed?
Yes, there are. The areas that don't have coloration or a pattern on them will not be disturbed.
Is there an area shaded in green or a pattern of green?
Well, there are several.
Okay. There's a large patterned area of green that's just on the right-hand side of the center of the map?
This one here?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you describe what that indicates?
That is an area that no mining activity will take place. It is along the paddock pastures, for example. I don't know if they winter in there, but they utilize these as pastures for their livestock. And they service use agreement with Padlock has isolated that area, say there will be no mining in that area. And there will be fencing to ensure that nothing crosses the boundary between the mine and the pasturage. We have a special use. It also is a walk-in area for hunting, and some of that will still be utilized as walk-in area. Not the entire section as it used to be in the past, but parts of it will be suitable for walk-in hunting.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. And can you turn to page 12-134? This is another map.
Mr. Coleman, will you be at a good stopping point here soon?
Yes, after we discuss this page.
Okay,
we will.
great.
Okay.
Can you describe what this document is?
Yes, this is what we call the coal removal sequence that has to be planned 5 years in advance. And so we have the sequences that the panels will take place in. And we've got systems of mining that will be taking place in here that are timed to a very specific point in time. Month 1, month 2, month 3, like that, during year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. The first 5 years has been engineered all the way down to what month they're going to be in that particular part of the mine.
Does this map indicate the location of the pits?
It does.
Okay. How does it show those?
It locates the trenches diagonal to the actual panels that we put in place with the longwall miner. And so they're indicated as kind of long oblong shapes with a TR1, TR2 type designation in script on that.
Okay. You mentioned panels. Can you describe what those are?
Longwall panels are systems that are being developed as the longwall miner works its way down into the coal and then it backs out, offsets. Those systems are called panels as they're being mined down into the end of the miner's capacity. And so this is the entire area that will be mined, realizing 50% recovery will take place.
Okay. So in those areas, I guess we'll call them rainbow areas because of the colors.
Skittles.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Skittles now.
Okay. Does the boundaries where those areas are, the rainbow areas are, what does that show?
That shows the outside disturbance areas that they will undermine, that they will mine through. And so it shows the total outline of the area that will be subject to highwall mining.
Okay. And so where the patterns end, that is where the highwall mining will end.
Yes, there is no mining in those areas, even though they're within the permit boundary. There are areas that will not be mined.
Have the shapes of the panels changed over the course of the permit review process?
They have changed a little bit from the very first iteration that we got to the last.
Okay. Regarding the pit you described as TR1,
okay.
And that is the pit on the Bighorn coal property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Has the mine panels on that pit changed over the course of the permit application?
They've been shifted to the south about 1,700 feet.
Do you recall when that change occurred?
I don't. I'd be guessing. I would say it was in, I think round 1, but I could be round 2, so I don't know exactly.
So does that make the mine panel shorter than it was?
It does.
Okay.
In that area.
Okay. All right, and this is the most, is this the most recent version?
This is the most recent version. This is the one that's inside the permit application now.
Okay. So these would be the mine panels that the council and DEQ would be approving if they approve the.
Yes, they
permit.
would. Yep, the first 5 years.
Okay. All right. And that is my last question on that map. And I think this is a good breaking point, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. So we will recess now until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Is it okay for us to leave things in the room?
Jim, can we leave stuff in the room?